Hi everyone. Today I'm continuing on with my October journey through the horror films of 1972, 50 years ago. Today I want to talk about Dr. Phibes Rises Again, which is the sequel to The Abominable Dr. Phibes, which came out in 1971, a year before, and was a considerable hit for AIP, American International Pictures. Dr. Phibes is played by Vincent in one of his most memorable performances, to be sure. Directed by Robert Fust. And Robert Fust has a commentary. There's two commentaries. There's two discs here, one for each movie, and there's two commentaries on each disc. And on the first movie, there's one with the director, Robert Fust, years later. So he's quite old and looking back on Dr. Phibes, and it's in the form of an interview. And now both of these movies are these are camp horror movies. They're horror movies, but they've got considerable amount of camp in them. And at one point in the interview, Fust is asked if he could define what camp is. And he couldn't. He hemmed and hawed. He says, I know I'm doing camp, but I really don't. I can't describe it. So the interviewer cites from a famous essay by Susan Sontag that is about camp, and I guess from the 1960s when it was first noticed as a sensibility. And so he recites, quotes Susan Sontag's definition of camp. This is her one-sentence definition to Fust, and it goes, a sensibility that revels in artifice, stylization, theatricalization, irony, playfulness, and exaggeration, rather than content. When Fust heard that definition, he said, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. And I was thinking about camp as I was watching the first film, and noticed its campy elements to a British TV show from the 1960s that was very popular in Britain and actually made the transition to American primetime TV, and that's The Avengers, a famous TV show starring Patrick Macnee and Diana Rigg. Hardly any British television shows were in prime time in the U.S., but it wasn't a big hit, but it was a hit. It played for, I think, all the years of Diana Rigg and Linda Thorson, who replaced her. And she played Emma Peel, and she was a sensation. Diana Rigg was just, she became an overnight ideal for a lot of teenage boys, and she was a very strong female character. She knew karate. She had great chemistry with Patrick Macnee, John Steed, and Emma Peel, and her outfits, the whole look of the television series was very much campy. There was it was a spy show, but it was. You really didn't have to take it too seriously, but it was very well made, very well performed, with a lot of terrific character actors that Fust uses in the Dr. Phibes two movies, as well as a lot of the technical crew as well, and including Brian Eatwell, who is the production designer on both Phibes movies. Now, Fust himself started out as a production designer, and in the Diana Rigg era, he was the production designer on maybe a dozen episodes. And then in the Linda Thorson era, he actually directed 9 or 10 episodes of The Avengers. But the two of them together in Dr. Phibes they know how to get a lot out of a little. And, especially with the opening sequence in Dr. Phibes is, it's like a ballroom up in up these stairways. There's Dr. Phibes playing the organ, and there's a mechanical band, like mannequins that are pretending to play instruments. And while I guess it's the 1930s, this is a 1930s setting, are playing songs from that era. And it's just gorgeous, the ballroom and Art Deco, very much of a look of that. And the story-wise, it's the first one, The Abominable Dr. Phibes, he is seeking revenge. It's a revenge movie, and on the people, the doctors and the nurses that were in the operating room when Dr. Phibes' wife died on the operating table. He blames them, all of them, for her death. And everybody thinks Dr. Phibes himself is dead because on his way, he's rushing to get to his wife because she has become sick. He supposedly dies in a fiery automobile accident, but he survived. he definitely looks like he's been in a fire. But of course, then he has the Vincent Price mask. And he has an inexhaustible supply of money, a Swiss bank account. He couldn't possibly exhaust it. He's living in this big mansion in London. He has a assistant, Vulneria, and she doesn't speak. Now, Dr. Phibes doesn't speak either. And you can tell when you don't see him without his mask that he has some contraption he puts on his ear. He moves his throat. Vincent Price loved this because he didn't have to learn his lines. It was either pre-recorded or post-recorded. But the makeup is so great. I mean, he's so expressive with the makeup. And his aide doesn't speak. She's just beautiful. They have two different actresses in playing the role in the movies. But she's just dressed in gorgeous costumes, and she's like a model. But she assists him in these murders because he's devising these grotesque murders for these. He doesn't just want to kill him; he wants to kill him in macabre ways, and bats, rats, insects. It's really something to see. And then, of course, the camera focuses on the cadavers after the deaths, and that's the horror, the real horror film, because the makeup artist was pretty good on these cadavers. But in Dr. Phibes Rises Again, they go to Egypt because in Egypt there is the river of life, and he's woke up in the beginning of Dr. Phibes Rises Again. He has preserved his wife. His wife looks just the same as she was, before she died. And in Egypt, there is the river of life, and the moon and the planets are aligned in, a way that he now is. This is the time he can find the river of life in some cave in Egypt, in the deserts of Egypt. So somehow he takes this whole kit and caboodle to Egypt, and it winds up in this big cave, and it's ridiculous, but it's meant to be fun. And there's so many fun things along the way, like posing with Vulneria as Lawrence of Arabia. Dr. Phibes is Lawrence of Arabia. And he has in the sequel, he has an enemy, an antagonist, who's also looking for his own personal reasons, also looking for this river of life. Dr. Phibes' wife is going to be reborn and will live forever, but he has reasons too that he wants to get to this river of life. And the character's name is Darius Beiderbecke, and a great name. And we learn in the comic, Tim Lucas said that Robert Fust, in his commentary on the second film, he says that Fust loved to use names of jazz singers. And Bix Beiderbecke was a famous jazz musician of the 40s and 50s. And it's played by Robert Quarry, who had made a splash with playing Count Yorga. They didn't get along. They were enemies in the movie, but they're also enemies on the offset because, off camera, because Price, in his 60s now, he thought his contract at AIP was ending, and he thought this guy was being groomed to be his replacement, Robert Quarry. So there is a great deal of tension there. But along the way in both movies, we get to see a lot of great British character actors with just little cameos. Peter Cushing has like a minute. He's prominently displayed in the credits. He has about a minute in role. Anybody could have played. Beryl Reid has she only gets a minute or two herself. And it doesn't have much to do with the plot, but it's a delightful little scene with the inspectors of Scotland Yard who are brought back, who were very funny in the original and were brought back for the sequel. Terry Thomas, who was one of the victims in the first film, that comes back as a shipping magnate whose ship has evidently taken all Dr. Phibes' kit and caboodle over to Egypt. They want to know, what did he actually take? Hugh Griffith, who allegedly had to be in every AIP movie, he was in the original as like a Hebrew scholar, and here he is a kind of a fellow archaeologist, and he gets in the way of Dr. Phibes. So in the first movie we have revenge, and the second movie he's just killing off people that are in the way on his journey to discover the river of life. I have to mention John Thaw. He had a very, very young John Thaw. This is Inspector Morse. And he also makes a very brief appearance, and he had been in British TV for like 10 years. Much to my amazement, he must have been a teenager when he started out in TV. So he has nothing to say either, except he screams. His scene ends with a scream. Fiona Lewis, I have to mention too. She plays Beiderbecke's love interest who accompanies him. But she plays it straight. While everybody else is sort of camping it up, she plays it like she's in a regular movie, and it's very effective. It's almost like a relief sometimes to see Fiona Lewis. You might know Fiona Lewis from Brian De Palma's The Fury, which comes a few years after the Phibes movies. The first film was a hit. It was a hit in the U.S. The sequel was not, and for a number of reasons it didn't. Well, for one thing, it got terrible reviews. Gene Siskel gave it 1 star. Fust in his commentary says that AIP really took it away from him, re-edited it. It was very choppy. I think the death scenes aren't nearly as inventive and memorable as the ones in the original movie. He also says that there was always talk about another movie to be made, and Fust says he knows nothing about it. He never heard a word about it, and he was not involved in any kind of enterprise to make another Dr. Phibes movie. I have to say too that I pretty much agree with the consensus that the original much better made film than the sequel, but the sequel is still a heck of a lot of fun, and especially in the ending. The ending of Dr. Phibes Rises Again is really beautiful. Robert Corey is great, and Vincent Price great, very poignant ending, and a really great send-off. I'm always kind of glad they didn't do a sequel, because this is really a perfect ending to these two films. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.